I want you to imagine, just for a moment, that you have been dropped right into the middle of this vast, endless desert,
Okay, setting the scene, I like it.
right? And the sky above you is just this flat, dull gray. There is no sun to orient you. There are zero reference points on the horizon, so like no mountains, no trees. You have no GPS. You have no compass. You have absolutely nothing to guide you. The question is, do you think you could walk your way out?
Well, that is basically the ultimate survival nightmare. I mean, most people faced with that level of sensory deprivation, they assume that their sheer willpower and, basic common sense will save them.
Okay, so let's unpack this, because if you apply what feels like undeniable logic to that situation, the answer just seems completely obvious.
Right, you just pick a direction.
You pick a direction and you put one foot in front of the other. As long as you walk in a perfectly straight line with absolute determination, every single step takes you further from the center and closer to the edge. Ergo, you escape.
It sounds totally foolproof. I mean, in theory, step-by-step logic dictates that moving forward brings you closer to a boundary. But the terrifying reality of human biomechanics tells a completely different story.
Wait, really?
Yeah, factually, scientifically, if you try to walk in a straight line in a featureless landscape without a fixed external reference point, you will eventually end up right back exactly where you started.
Which just feels wrong. I mean, it feels like a violation of basic physics. How does aggressively walking forward somehow lead you in a giant circle?
Well, it comes down to the microscopic, unavoidable imperfections in your own biology. Nobody on Earth is perfectly symmetrical. So maybe your right foot is just a fraction of a millimeter larger than your left. Or maybe your left leg is a tiny bit longer, or the muscle density in one calf pulls slightly harder.
Okay, so one side just dominates slightly.
Exactly. And for the first 100 steps, or even the first 1,000 steps, those tiny deviations are practically invisible. But over the course of millions of steps in that desert, well, the math catches up with you. Yeah, those imperceptible discrepancies accumulate. They pull your trajectory, so you feel with every fiber of your rational calculating mind that you are walking a true straight line. But you are actually carving out a massive slow curve. Your own body and your blind trust and your moment-to-moment logic steers you right back to square one.
And that horrifying little glitch in human navigation is the perfect entry point for what we are exploring today. We are taking a deep dive into a fascinating translated text by an author named Zufeng, and it explores a phenomenon he calls illusory thinking.
It's a really incredible concept.
It is. The mission here is to understand how we can be utterly, unshakably convinced that every single logical step we take is correct, even as we are actively walking ourselves into a completely absurd, useless, or even disastrous destination.
Yeah, because illusory thinking challenges our ultimate safety net, which is our rationality. We naturally assume that if our internal logic is sound, if the math checks out on paper, we are safe. But Sui Feng's text argues that relying purely on that internal micrologic is precisely how the trap snaps shut.
Right, and to really grasp this, we have to look at how our senses betray us on a neurological level. There's an example the author brings up of a visual illusion that was originally published in a Reader's Digest magazine.
Oh, the waterfall illusion, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a drawing of a waterfall. Visually, you look at the top, and you can see the water cascading downward, exactly as gravity dictates. But as your eyes follow the stream down through the aqueducts in the image, the water flowing downward somehow ends up flowing right back into the top of the waterfall.
Which is physically impossible.
Physically impossible.
But the visual cortex is fascinating because it processes local information first. So when you look at any single square inch of that drawing, the local geometry makes perfect sense.
Like the angles look right.
Exactly. Water falls down, the angles align. Your brain checks the logic of that specific spot and says, yes, this is correct. Yet the grand conclusion of the image water returning to the top without any sort of pump completely defies the reality of physics.
So it is a paradox that your brain initially accepts, because every individual piece of the puzzle looks right, even though the total picture is impossible.
Precisely. You get lost in the local logic.
So if our visual logic can be hacked by a clever drawing, what happens when our physical environment actively tries to trick us? The text moves from that theoretical visual puzzle to a documented, real-world phenomenon in rural China that is just wild.
The millet fields.
Yes, it involves this bizarre folk saying, cut down the millet bundles and you'll stir up the wandering spirits.
Right, and this happens during the autumn millet harvest. Millet is a type of cereal crop, and farmers go out into the fields to gather it, binding the stalks into bundles. But for about a month after this harvesting begins, a highly localized phenomenon occurs.
And these are locals, right? They know the area.
Oh, absolutely. These farmers have lived on this specific plot of land their entire lives. They know every rock, tree, and ditch on these paths, but they suddenly start getting completely lost if they venture out at night.
They're walking the exact same dirt roads they've walked 10,000 times, but they get totally trapped.
Completely disoriented.
They end up wandering in circles all night long,
Mm.
completely disoriented in their own backyards. And the spell only breaks when they hear something that violently jolts their senses, like a rooster crowing at dawn, or the sudden sharp sound of a human voice.
And then boom.
Right, boom. The illusion shatters, and they realize they've been walking in a tight circle 50 feet from their own front door.
The sensation is so jarring that the old folks saying naturally blames wandering spirits for clouding their vision. But the prevailing biological theory for this phenomenon gives us our core definition of illusory thinking.
Which is what exactly?
Well, the harvesting of the millet is believed to release certain complex molecules or highly specific organic scents into the air. When inhaled over long periods, these airborne compounds act as a mild narcotic on the human nervous system.
Wait, so they were literally being drugged by the defensive mechanisms of the plant?
Basically, yes. The plant molecules induce a localized state of numbness in the brain's spatial processing centers. And this gives us Shui Feng's definition of what illusory thinking actually is.
Okay, let's hear it.
It is a state where the nervous system is numbed either by a physical substance, like the millet molecules, or by something entirely non-material, like an ideology. This numbness distorts reality, creating an invisible maze in the mind.
And the most dangerous part of this is how it actually feels to the person trapped inside. Because to the farmer walking in circles in the dark, they don't feel confused or intoxicated.
Not at all.
They feel incredibly sharp. They feel totally rational. They are absolutely certain that they are walking the correct path toward home, completely oblivious to the absurdity of their actions until that rooster crows.
In their mind, they are just putting one foot in front of the other. The micrologic of the step is perfect. The macro reality is entirely wrong, always right, yet forever lost.
But wait, I have to push back on this a little. If a literal plant scent in a field can hijack our internal navigation system, is illusory thinking just a biological glitch, like a weird reaction to an autumn harvest? Or is this pointing to a much deeper structural flaw in how human consciousness itself operates?
That structural flaw is exactly the pivot the text makes. The concept scales up from a lone farmer in a physical field to the entirety of human civilization. If a farmer can get physically lost in a field, an intellectual or a whole society can get philosophically lost in the landscape of their own collective mind.
So a macro-level illusion.
Exactly. Macroscopically, Shuefeng argues that humanity is existing within a grand illusion,
And the text refers to this macro trap as the 36-8 trigrams arrays.
which is a metaphor drawn from ancient Chinese divination and military strategy. A trigram array is essentially a complex, shifting labyrinth designed to confuse and trap an enemy. The idea here is that society constantly believes it is making progress.
We think we're moving forward step by step with new science, new technology, and new philosophies.
Right. But collectively, we are just walking in that massive desert curve. We are looping right back to the start, trapped in the array, unless we are guided by someone who is entirely free from the illusion.
To make this high-level intellectual trap concrete, the text brings up a very specific example from the 1960s. It targets the New Age philosophy movement.
This is such a great example.
Yeah, specifically it points to the teachings of two figures, named Seth and Oren, which were famous, channeled spiritual entities from that era. And also an article titled Beyond Time and Space, published by Lifechanyuan, which is a modern spiritual community that explores these exact types of deep, abstract philosophical questions.
Right.
Now, even if you've never read a single New Age book in your life, the mechanism of how this philosophy traps people is incredibly relatable to anyone living today.
It really is. It serves as a masterclass in how complexity seduces the human ego. When someone first encounters this type of highly abstract, deeply metaphysical philosophy, it feels like a profound divine revelation. The text notes that to the reader, it feels deeper and more fundamental than even Einstein's theory of relativity.
It hits you with these massive cosmic concepts. You read it, and initially you feel tiny. You feel humbled by the sheer scale of the universe they're describing.
But that humility is a Trojan horse.
Oh, absolutely.
As you delve deeper, as you start to comprehend the complex terminology and the dense internal logic of the philosophy your ego inflates, you master the jargon. You start to feel a massive sense of intellectual superiority.
Because you understand the secret rules of the universe and nobody else does.
Right. You begin to view yourself as an enlightened being standing high above the ignorant masses. The author perfectly captures this arrogance as the belief that everyone else is drunk while they alone are sober.
Which is incredibly ironic because they are the ones intoxicated by the illusory thinking. And the text uses a brilliant analogy to describe what happens when you fully commit to this mindset.
The Tang Sang analogy.
Yes. It compares getting deeper into this philosophy to Tang Sang, the famous monk from the classic Chinese tale Journey to the West, wandering blindly into the spider cave.
The spider cave captures the paralysis perfectly.
Because every sentence you read in these texts sounds so profound. Transcending time and space, the eternal soul. It all sounds perfectly logical within its own closed-loop framework, but it is an endless sticky web.
Yeah, every time you pull on a thread of this philosophy to try and find a practical, applicable truth, the web just wraps around you tighter.
Exactly. You're told you must transcend space. But the author asks the obvious grounding question. Where exactly do you go after transcending space? What is the actual tangible purpose of this eternal existence?
And you can't answer it.
No, you just read and read, analyzing every thread, and you end up right back where you started, totally paralyzed by abstraction.
It is the intellectual equivalent of the farmer walking in the millet field. You are moving, you are exerting massive mental effort, you are processing data, but you are not actually arriving anywhere meaningful.
You know what it reminds me of? It's like building a perfectly engineered staircase that just leads directly into a brick wall. Like, the math is flawless, the steps are perfectly measured, but the destination is entirely useless.
I love that. The micronavigation is perfect, but the macro reality is totally useless.
And we see this today, right? Someone gets deep into a hyper-optimized productivity system or a bizarre algorithmic echo chamber on social media. They have an answer for everything within their system, but their actual life is going nowhere.
That perfectly illustrates the terrifying problem at the heart of this. If an individual or an entire society gets trapped in a massive web of perfect logic that actually leads nowhere, how do they break out?
Right.
Because if logic is the very tool that built the labyrinth logic, absolutely cannot be the tool used to dismantle it.
You can't think your way out of a trap made entirely of thoughts.
Exactly. You need an external shock. You need a disruption that doesn't argue with your logic but shatters the trance entirely. You need the rooster to crow.
Which takes us to a fascinating historical examination in the text. The author brings up a quote from Chairman Mao. With the crow of the rooster, the world awakens.
Right, and we should clarify the context here.
Yes, we need to be very clear here. The author of our source text is not using this quote as political dogma, and we aren't either. We are just analyzing the text. Shufeng is using this specific historical moment strictly as a metaphor to describe an authoritative force commanding what he calls non-material structures to retreat.
Right. It serves as an example of a massive society-wide reset of the collective consciousness. The text describes how following this metaphorical rooster's crow in mid-century China, there were massive, sweeping social movements.
Campaigns with intense names.
Yes. Campaigns named Smash Superstition, Liberate Thought, and Sweep Away All Monsters and Demons.
According to the author, this collective snap to reality, this systemic shock suddenly eradicated a deeply entrenched list of societal illusions, things that had trapped people in logical loops for generations.
We are talking about beliefs in ghost possessions, spirit dances, fortune-telling exorcisms, secret societies, and various Taoist sects.
And it didn't just clear out metaphysical superstitions. The text notes it also swept away terrestrial vices that numbed the population, like widespread prostitution, opium addiction, and gambling.
The mechanism of escape is what matters to the author's central point here. Society didn't hold a massive debate and logically deduced that opium or ghost possessions were bad.
The internal logic of those vices and superstitions was too strong.
Exactly. Instead, just like the single farmer waking up from his trance only when he hears the sudden sharp sound of the literal rooster in the field, an entire society snapped out of a centuries-old maze of illusory thinking because of a disruptive, undeniable external shock.
So what does this all mean for us? Is the author suggesting that deeply entrenched collective illusions simply cannot be reasoned away? You can't just debate someone out of a cult or a conspiracy theory or a toxic ideology with more logic. That we actually require a massive disruptive shock to the system to wake everybody up.
That is the exact implication. Logic fails against illusory thinking because illusory thinking is inherently seductive. It flatters your intelligence. It makes you feel like you hold the secret knowledge.
And the text notes how exceptionally dangerous this becomes when high-status people fall into the trap.
Yeah.
The intellectuals, government officials, celebrities, the financial moguls.
When the leaders of society fall prey to illusory thinking, it creates a cascading disaster because the broader public naturally mimics their every move and adopts their mindsets.
And it's so hard to pull them out.
The text uses a powerful ancient phrase to describe the gravity of this trap. Once a person is truly committed to this state, 18 oxen cannot pull a person back.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. Why is the grip so strong? Why can't the best, most educated minds just debunk it on paper?
Well, the author argues that illusory thinking actually outperforms standard material and associative thinking because it taps into non-material energy.
Now, this isn't necessarily literal magic, right?
No, think of it as the underlying psychological or emotional forces. Archetypes, deep-seated beliefs, the human desire for meaning. These operate on a level that defies conventional scientific measurement.
It bypasses the analytical brain and speaks directly to the subconscious.
Exactly, which leaves pure materialist scientists completely helpless against it. They try to apply empirical data to an emotional or spiritual illusion.
And there's a great metaphor for this in the text.
There is. It compares the greatest scientists trying to logically refute illusory thinking to a tiger eating the sky, no place to bite.
A tiger eating the sky. I absolutely love that. You have all these sharp teeth, all this incredible analytical power, but there is simply nothing solid for you to sink your logic into. It just slips right past your empirical arguments because the illusion isn't built on empirical facts.
Right, and what makes this non-material energy even more bewildering is that the people who seem to wield it most effectively often have absolutely no idea how the mechanism works.
The unknowing practitioners.
Yes, the text points out that there are unknowing practitioners all around us. Prophets who can accurately predict the future, shamans who perform successful exorcisms, astrologers and fortune tellers who can foresee major life events with startling accuracy.
And to be clear, the author isn't trying to debunk their abilities. He's saying they actually work. But he notes that these practitioners are themselves completely baffled by the true source of their own insights.
They are tapping into deep psychological or unseen forces they do not logically understand.
They are operating entirely within the illusion, using the tools of the illusion, without ever seeing the overarching structure of the maze they are standing in.
They are powerful within the context of the dream, but they are still dreaming.
Which brings us to the ultimate warning of the text. Why do we keep walking into the maze if it leads nowhere? Because the maze is incredibly beautiful. Illusory thinking is dazzling.
It really is.
The text compares it to a breathtakingly beautiful woman. It invokes legendary enchantresses from history like Balsi or Daji. These were mythological and historical figures whose beauty was so profound it supposedly brought down entire empires.
Or it compares it to a ghostly temptress in disguise.
Right. The author says that encountering this kind of profound, transcendent, illusory thinking is mesmerizing. It possesses infinite charm.
But the author makes a highly nuanced point here about how to handle that charm. He argues it is actually okay to dabble in it.
Really, just dabble.
Yeah, it is perfectly fine to engage in a brief, appropriate interaction with these profound, abstract thoughts. You can read the 1960s New Age philosophy, you can ponder the eternal soul, you can appreciate the aesthetic beauty of a perfectly closed logical loop.
But, and this is the critical warning, if you drop your guard and surrender to it completely, if you strip away your tether to physical reality and fully commit to the illusion your life is forfeited, you will be entirely consumed by it.
The beautiful web will become your permanent home and you will never produce anything of real value again.
You know, it's like test driving an experimental sports car that has a jet engine but no brakes. Sitting in it and admiring the engineering is totally fine. But the second you put it in gear and fully commit, you've sealed your fate.
That is a perfect way to look at it.
So how do we keep our grip? If our moment-to-moment logic is completely untrustworthy and the trap is so beautiful that 18 oxen can't pull us out, what is the actual cure?
Well, the text offers a very specific practical defense mechanism. Since every single microstep you take will feel logical and correct in the moment, you cannot rely purely on immediate logic. You must constantly obsessively zoom out.
You have to force yourself to look at the macro picture.
Yes, you have to stop walking, put your internal logic on pause, and ask yourself a very simple question. Is there a fundamental flaw in the path I am walking right now? If I continue this way, where will it ultimately finally lead me?
You have to look past the comfort of the next step and stare directly at the final destination.
Exactly. And to help you do that without getting lost in your own head again, the text suggests you don't just rely on your own brain. It advises periodically seeking guidance from the true historical heavyweights of human wisdom.
It specifically names Jesus, the Buddha, Muhammad, and Laozi.
Right. The idea is to take your current path, your current perfect logic, and hold it up against their enduring teachings to ensure you haven't strayed into a beautifully engineered logical dead end.
You use their profound, time-tested wisdom as the fixed reference points that are missing from that gray, featureless desert. They act as the compass. They provide the coordinates that prevent you from walking in that imperceptible circle, helping you see the whole board rather than just the single square you were standing on.
It is a profoundly humbling reminder that feeling right and having all the math to prove you are right is not the same thing as actually moving forward.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us in this deep dive into the labyrinth of the human mind. We've gone from farmers lost in millet fields to the highest abstract philosophies, all to understand how our own perfect reasoning can be the very thing that betrays us.
It's been a fascinating journey.
It really has. And we want to leave you with a final lingering thought to mull over today as you look at your own logical paths. If our most flawless step-by-step reasoning can reliably lead us into a perfect, inescapable circle, what if the true measure of our intelligence isn't how bulletproof our arguments are, but our willingness to occasionally abandon our own logic, stop walking, and just listen for the rooster's crow?